started like any other Tuesday night. I was behind the wheel of my rig, heading south on Route 71 with a trailer full of frozen goods bound for Texas. My CB handle was Night Owl, fitting given I'd spent most of my life running hauls after dark. The pay was better, the roads were quieter, and there was a strange peace in being alone under the stars. But that night, the peace was shattered. Around 2:30 a.m., I was cruising through a desolate stretch of Missouri. It was one of those places where the trees loomed over the highway like dark sentinels, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional flicker of a distant lightning storm on the horizon. I was just about to crack open my third can of Red Bull when the radio crackled. At first, I thought it was just static, but then a voice broke through. It was a woman, her tone frantic, almost pleading. "Breaker, breaker. Anyone out there? Please, I need help. I'm on Route 71, somewhere near mile marker 105. My car broke down, and the transmission cut out, replaced by a high-pitched whine. My gut tightened. It wasn't uncommon to hear stranded motorists on the CB, but something about her voice, it didn't sound right. I slowed down, scanning the roadside for signs of a vehicle. Sure enough, just past mile marker 105, I saw a car on the shoulder, a beat-up red sedan with its hazard lights flashing. It was angled slightly off the road, as if it had veered out of control. I pulled over about 20 yards ahead, my rig's engine rumbling as I hit the parking brake. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, the night air thick with the scent of rain and wet asphalt. As I approached the car, I noticed the driver's side door was wide open, but there was no one inside. A faint buzzing sound came from the dashboard, probably the radio still on. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing into the stillness. No answer. I shone my flashlight into the surrounding trees, the beam slicing through the darkness. "Ma'am, are you here? I heard your call. I'm here to help." Nothing. Just the rustling of leaves and the distant growl of thunder. I should have gotten back in my truck right then and there, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I leaned into the car and saw a cell phone on the passenger seat, its screen cracked and flickering. On the floor mat lay a purse, its contents scattered. A wallet, a tube of lipstick, some loose cash. But what caught my attention was the photo tucked into the wallet. It showed a young woman with long blonde hair and a wide smile, holding hands with a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5. On the back of the photo, in neat handwriting, was a note. "For Emily and Jake, always." A chill ran down my spine. Where were they? I stepped back from the car, my flashlight sweeping the ground. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the mud leading into the woods. Small ones, probably hers. But there was something else. A second set of prints, much larger, trailed alongside hers. And they weren't human. I stood there frozen, staring at the tracks. The second set of prints was massive, too big for any human, and shaped like something I couldn't explain. For long, clawed toes, each one pressed deep into the mud as if whatever made them was heavy. Unnaturally heavy. My instinct screamed at me to get back in my rig and drive. Whatever this was, it wasn't my problem. But then I thought about the woman, Emily, and the kid. If those were her tracks, then she had gone into the woods and something or someone was following her. Against every ounce of common sense I had, I pulled out my phone and turned on its flashlight for extra light. The beam from my truck's flashlight barely penetrated the thick wall of trees, so I gritted my teeth and stepped off the shoulder, following the trail. The forest was suffocatingly silent. No crickets, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and the faint hum of my breath in the cold air. Every few feet, I'd pause and look around, half expecting to hear her voice or see her step out from behind a tree. Instead, all I felt was the growing weight of the darkness pressing down on me. About 50 yards in, the tracks veered sharply to the right, leading to a narrow path that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The underbrush was overgrown, thorny branches tearing at my jacket as I pushed through. That's when I saw the first sign something was wrong. Really wrong. A piece of red fabric hung from one of the thorns. I reached out to grab it, and as I did, the flashlight caught something else. It was smeared on the leaves, dark and glistening. Blood. Emily? I called out again, louder this time, my voice cracking slightly. No response. Just the sound of the storm creeping closer. I pressed on, my grip tightening on the flashlight. The tracks were harder to see now, the mud giving way to patches of wet leaves and tangled roots. But I could still make out that strange, clawed trail beside hers. It was erratic, zigzagging as if whatever made it had been stalking her, hunting her. Then I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. A low, guttural growl, somewhere ahead of me in the trees. I froze, listening. The growl came again, deeper this time, closer. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was wet, almost choking, like something struggling to contain its rage. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, my pulse hammering in my ears. The beam caught movement, a shadow darting between the trees, too quick for me to make out any details. But it was big, bigger than anything that should have been out here. Emily? I called again, my voice trembling now. If you can hear me, say something. This time I got an answer. A scream, high-pitched, raw, and absolutely terrified. It came from deeper in the woods, and it was followed by a crashing sound, like branches snapping under something enormous. I broke into a run, adrenaline pushing me forward despite every instinct telling me to turn back. The scream cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. When I reached the source of the sound, I almost wished I hadn't. There was a clearing, bathed in pale moonlight, and in the center of it lay Emily's purse, her phone, and a single shoe. But she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I saw the prints again, her small ones leading into the clearing, and the massive, clawed ones circling the spot like a predator pacing its kill. And then I heard the growl again, this time directly behind me. The growl behind me was so close I could feel it rumbling through the air, vibrating in my chest like the engine of my rig when it's pushed to the limit. I didn't turn around immediately, hell, I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, frozen, gripping my flashlight like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Slowly, I forced myself to turn. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. It was too wrong, too unnatural. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, crouched low like it was ready to spring. Its skin, or fur, was slick and black, glistening in the dim light, like it had just crawled out of a swamp. The head was elongated, almost canine, but the teeth, God, the teeth, rows of jagged, yellowed fangs that didn't fit in its mouth, dripping with something thick and dark. And its eyes, those were the worst. They glowed, not from my flashlight but from within, too piercing, amber orbs locked onto me like I was its next meal. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt like it had been bolted to the ground, every nerve screaming at me to get the hell out of there. But it was too late. The thing let out another growl, low and guttural, and then it stood up to its full height. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "Stay back!" I shouted, though my voice cracked halfway through. The creature cocked its head, like it was studying me, and then, to my horror, it stepped forward. My brain was running 1,000 miles an hour, scrambling for some kind of plan. I had nothing, no weapon, no way to fight this thing. All I had was my truck flashlight, and I knew damn well that wasn't going to stop it. But then, just as it took another step toward me, something changed. From deeper in the woods, there came another sound. It wasn't a growl this time, it was a voice. A child's voice. "Mommy? Mommy, where are you?" The creature froze, its ears twitching at the sound. It turned its head toward the voice, and for a brief moment, I saw something in its posture. A hesitation, like it was torn between me and the child. I didn't waste the opportunity. My legs finally obeyed, and I bolted, crashing through the trees in the direction of the voice. Branches whipped at my face, and roots clawed at my boots, but I didn't stop. The child's voice was getting louder, more desperate. "Mommy, help me!" I burst into another clearing, this one smaller than the last. In the center stood a little boy, no older than 5, clutching a stuffed rabbit to his chest. His face was streaked with tears, and his wide eyes darted around the darkness. "Jake," I whispered, remembering the name from the photo. "Jake, it's okay. I'm here to help." He looked at me, but before he could say anything, the growl came again. Louder this time, closer. The creature had followed me. I grabbed Jake's hand and pulled him behind me, putting myself between him and whatever was coming. "Run," I whispered to him. "When I say go, you run as fast as you can. Understand?" He nodded, clutching the stuffed rabbit tighter. The growling grew louder, and I turned to face the woods. My flashlight caught the creature's glowing eyes as it emerged into the clearing. It was even more terrifying up close, its breath steaming in the cold night air, claws flexing as it stepped closer. It stopped just a few feet away, and for a moment, we stared at each other. I don't know why it didn't attack right then. Maybe it was sizing me up. Maybe it liked the fear pouring off me in waves. And then I heard it again, the voice of the little boy, but this time it wasn't Jake. It was coming from the creature itself. "Mommy, help me." The words were garbled, twisted, like they didn't belong in its throat, but they were unmistakable. It was mimicking him, taunting me. Hearing the creature mimic Jake's voice twisted my stomach into knots. It wasn't just a predator. It was something far worse, something intelligent, something cruel. It took a step closer, its massive claws slicing through the dirt, its glowing eyes never leaving mine. I tightened my grip on Jake's hand and whispered, "When I say run, you run to my truck. Okay? Big rig on the side of the road. You can't miss it." Jake's tiny voice trembled. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," I lied. The creature let out a low, guttural snarl, crouching like it was ready to pounce. I knew I didn't have much time. My mind raced for a plan, any plan. Then I remembered the flashlight in my hand. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The thing's glowing eyes narrowed as it prepared to strike. I raised the flashlight and pointed it directly at its face, pressing the power button to cycle through its modes. One of them was a strobe, a blinding, disorienting burst of flashing light. The creature recoiled immediately, letting out a deafening roar that shook the ground. It staggered back, its claws slashing at the air as if trying to swat away the light. "Run, Jake!" I shouted, shoving him forward. "Go now!" Jake bolted toward the trees, his little legs pumping as fast as they could. I kept the flashlight aimed at the creature, my finger glued to the button to keep the strobe going. It howled in fury, its movements erratic and jerky, but it didn't back off completely. If anything, the light only seemed to make it angrier. "Come on!" I yelled, taking a shaky step back. "You want me? Come get me!" It lunged, faster than I expected, its claws swiping inches from my face. I stumbled and nearly fell but managed to keep the flashlight steady. The strobe flashed wildly, and for a split second, I saw its face up close. Those jagged teeth, that oily, black skin, and those eyes burning with hatred. I turned and ran, crashing through the woods in the direction Jake had gone. My heart pounded in my chest, every muscle screaming as I pushed myself forward. Behind me, I could hear the creature's heavy footfalls, tearing through the underbrush like a freight train. Somehow, I made it back to the road. My truck was just ahead, its headlights still on, a beacon in the darkness. Jake was already there, standing by the passenger door, his small hands pounding against the metal. "Climb in!" I shouted as I sprinted toward him. Jake scrambled up the steps and into the cab. I wasn't far behind, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition and fired up the engine. The creature burst out of the woods just as the truck roared to life. It was even more terrifying in the open, its massive frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. It charged toward us, its claws scraping the asphalt as it let out another ear-splitting roar. "Hold on!" I shouted, slamming the truck into gear. The tires screeched as I hit the gas, the rig lurching forward with a jolt. The creature was fast, faster than it had any right to be. It closed the distance in seconds, its claws raking against the back of the trailer. "Go away!" Jake screamed from the passenger seat, clutching his stuffed rabbit to his chest. I yanked the wheel hard, swerving the truck back and forth in an effort to shake it off. The trailer swung wildly, the weight shifting dangerously, but it worked. The creature lost its grip and tumbled onto the road behind us. I didn't stop. I kept my foot on the gas, the truck barreling down the highway at a breakneck speed. In the side mirror, I saw the creature rise to its feet. Its glowing eyes locked onto us as it let out one final bone-chilling roar. And then it disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. I drove for miles before I dared to slow down. When I finally pulled over at a brightly lit truck stop, my hands were still shaking. Jake was quiet, his face pale, but he didn't cry. He just sat there clutching his stuffed rabbit, staring out the window like he was waiting for the creature to come back. I don't know what that thing was or where it came from, but I know this: it wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that doesn't belong in our world. As I sit here now, writing this, I can still hear its growl in the back of my mind. And every time I close my eyes, I see those glowing, amber eyes staring back at me. Jake's safe. That's all that matters. But I'll never take another night shift again. The truck stop was a pocket of safety in an otherwise hostile night. The bright halogen lights buzzed overhead, bathing the lot in a pale, artificial glow. It felt almost surreal to be there, surrounded by the hum of idling rigs and the distant laughter of drivers swapping stories inside the diner. Jake sat beside me in the cab, still clutching his stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I tried to piece together what had just happened. My brain felt scrambled, like a radio tuned to the wrong frequency. Every time I thought about the creature, my hands started to shake. I could still feel its presence, like a weight pressing on my chest, and every shadow outside the truck seemed darker, deeper, like it was hiding something. "Are we safe now?" Jake's voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. I forced myself to look at him, to see the fear etched into his small face. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my voice hoarse. "We're safe now." It was a lie, but it was the only thing I could offer him. I needed answers. I left Jake in the truck with the doors locked and headed into the diner. The place was half empty, the kind of joint that stayed open all night for drivers like me. A few people glanced up as I walked in, probably noticing the dirt and scratches on my jacket, but no one said anything. I headed straight for the counter. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marlene, poured me a cup of coffee before I even asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sliding the cup toward me. "Something like that," I muttered, taking a sip. The coffee was scalding, but it did nothing to steady my nerves. "You ever hear about anything strange out on Route 71? Near mile marker 105. Marlene's expression shifted, her tired eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you ask?" "I picked up a kid out there," I said, my voice low. "His mom's gone, and there was something else, something that shouldn't exist." She didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at me like she was trying to decide whether I was crazy or serious. Finally, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not the first driver to talk about strange things out on that stretch of road. Folks around here call it the Black Hollow. People disappear out there. Cars found abandoned, no sign of the driver. Animals mutilated. And some of the ones who do make it back." She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "They talk about a creature, a shadow with glowing eyes. You're lucky to be alive." The words sent a chill down my spine. "What is it?" I asked. "Do you know?" Marlene shook her head. "Nobody knows. Some say it's a demon. Others think it's something older, something this world forgot a long time ago. But whatever it is, it doesn't like being seen. It's like you've crossed into its territory, and once you do, it doesn't let go easy." I glanced out the diner window at my truck, parked under the lights. Jake was in there, safe for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "How do you stop it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "You don't," Marlene said. "You just get as far away as you can and pray it doesn't follow you." I didn't stay long after that. I thanked Marlene, paid for the coffee, and headed back to the truck. Jake was still sitting there, his wide eyes locked on the windshield like he was watching for something. "We're leaving," I told him as I climbed into the cab. "We're getting out of here." He didn't argue. He just nodded, clutching his rabbit tighter. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading south again. The storm had finally caught up with us, rain pounding against the windshield as the wipers struggled to keep up. Every mile we put between us and the Black Hollow felt like a victory, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. It wasn't until we reached the outskirts of a small town hours later that I finally stopped. Jake was asleep in the passenger seat, his head resting against the window. I stepped out to stretch my legs and get some air, the rain having turned to a light drizzle. That's when I noticed the scratches. They were on the side of the trailer, long, jagged claw marks that hadn't been there before. My heart sank as I ran my fingers over them, the metal warped and torn like paper. It wasn't just a reminder of what had happened. It was a warning. I climbed back into the truck and locked the doors, my eyes scanning the dark road ahead. Somewhere out there, in the shadows of the night, it was still watching, waiting. I don't know why it let us go, and I don't think I ever will. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going back to Route 71. Some roads are better left untraveled. I kept driving through the drizzle, my eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. Every shadow on the side of the road, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, felt like a threat. Jake was fast asleep, his little chest rising and falling steadily. For his sake, I tried to stay calm, but my thoughts were racing. I'd heard stories from other truckers before, urban legends passed around over coffee at diners like the one back at the truck stop. Tales of haunted roads, ghost hitchhikers, and strange creatures that prowled the highways after dark. I'd always brushed them off as tall tales, the kind of thing drivers made up to pass the time. But now I wasn't so sure. The miles rolled by, and the rain finally stopped. The horizon began to lighten as dawn approached, the black sky giving way to shades of gray. I pulled into a rest area just outside of town, my body aching from the tension of the night. The place was empty except for a single sedan parked near the restrooms. Jake stirred as I shut off the engine. "Where are we?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Just a rest stop," I said, forcing a smile. "You hungry?" He nodded, clutching his stuffed rabbit as he climbed out of the truck. I grabbed a couple of snacks from the cab and followed him to a picnic table under a dim light. The world felt quiet, too quiet, like the calm after a storm. As Jake ate, I kept glancing at the woods surrounding the rest area. Every rustle of leaves or creak of a branch set my nerves on edge. But there was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. "Do you think Mommy's okay?" Jake's question hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I had no idea what had happened to Emily. The thought of her out there, alone with that thing lurking in the dark, made me sick. But I couldn't tell Jake that. He'd already been through enough. "She's tough," I said finally, trying to sound confident. "I bet she's looking for you right now." Jake seemed to accept that, nodding quietly as he nibbled on a granola bar. I wished I could believe it myself. We stayed at the rest area until the sun was fully up, the light washing away some of the fear that had gripped me all night. I decided to take Jake to the local sheriff's office to report what had happened. Maybe they could help find Emily, or at least figure out what the hell was going on out there. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Harlan, listened to my story with a skeptical frown. He didn't say much, just took notes and occasionally glanced at Jake, who sat quietly in the corner with his rabbit. When I finished, Harlan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk. "You're not the first to talk about strange things on that stretch of road," he said finally. "But I'll be honest with you, mister, most folks around here don't believe in monsters. They'll say it's a bear, or a mountain lion, or some other wild animal." "And what do you think?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Harlan's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something there. Something he wasn't saying. "I think you're lucky to be alive," he said. "And I think you should stay away from that road. That was the end of it." He said he'd send a team to check out the area near mile marker 105, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He probably thought I was just another trucker with a wild story. I dropped Jake off with child services later that day. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He clung to me, tears streaming down his face, begging me not to leave him. But I didn't have a choice. He needed stability, and I was in no shape to give it to him. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a pang of guilt so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. I'd saved him, sure, but I hadn't saved his mom. And deep down, I knew I'd never forgive myself for that. It's been 6 months since that night, and not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I quit the night shift and started driving local routes, short hauls during the day, nothing that takes me too far from home. I haven't been back to Route 71, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed and the world is quiet, I hear it. That growl, low and guttural, echoing in the back of my mind. I see those glowing eyes, watching me from the shadows, and I wonder, is it still out there? Is it waiting for me to cross its path again? And then I remember the scratches on my trailer. The ones I found at the truck stop. The ones that hadn't been there before. It let me go once. I don't think it'll let me go a second time.